you will be a much better leader for listening and learning than you will for trying to bluff that you know it all.
And he said, take away something from yourself that no one else can take away to build this discipline muscle.
There's always another way. But at the time when you're stuck in the middle of that, you can't see.
Just a real sliding doors moment. Got chatting to a guy in the lift in one of the offices who turned out to be the director of sales. Okay. Didn't know it was the director of sales, got on really well. And he came to find me and said, look, I've got this project around hearts and minds in the organization.
Great careers aren't built in the big moments alone. They're built in everyday choices, bold little moves, and gutsy next steps. Welcome to Little Moves, Big Careers. Let's dive straight in. Welcome back. I'm Caroline Esterson, and for the past 30 years, I've been helping people realise that working hard isn't the problem. It's your strategy around it, because early leadership just doesn't come with a manual, does it? And right now, don't know about you, but I think work feels really messy. Hybrid working has blurred boundaries. The rules keep shifting, and complexity isn't the exception anymore. It's the job. Over the past few weeks, you've heard 4 very different stories, but underneath them all sat the same truth. They didn't have a neat plan. There was plenty of doubt. And despite all of this, no one waited until they felt ready. And this matters because so many people stepping into leadership feel like they're navigating without a map. There's pressure to be confident and decisive whilst quietly wondering, am I doing enough? Am I ready? Do I really belong here? So this episode isn't a recap. It's 5 lessons hidden inside those conversations, all designed to help you lead with more clarity and courage, even when you don't have all the answers. Let's take each lesson one by one. Lesson 1. You don't need certainty. You just need to be curious. One of the strongest threads across these conversations was this: progress never comes from certainty. It comes from being curious. You need to be okay with not knowing and asking others. Let me hand over to Zoe to explain.
I think one of the most important things that I learned to do really early on was be okay with not knowing for that reason, and not try and bluff your way through it, because in that environment, it could have huge consequences. And I would say that actually served me really well when I went into leadership as well, of being okay with not knowing, being okay with not having all of the answers, and being okay that other people knew more.
Yeah.
And so just, walking around the station with a bit of paper and going, I've got someone in the office and this is what they're saying. What do I do? Because actually people love to be asked. They love to be able to show their experience and their, that credibility.
What I love about this moment with Zoe is how simple it sounds, but inside, it feels hard, because early leadership often comes with the silent pressure to look confident, to have the answer, and definitely don't get it wrong. But Zoe showed us that the opposite was actually her key to success. The moment she stopped pretending to know everything, she built trust faster, learned faster, and led better. So here's the reframe I'd like you to think about. Leadership isn't about knowing more. It's about being curious enough to want to learn. So before we move on to the second lesson, here's a tiny little move for you. Instead of keeping quiet when those thoughts are running in your head, ask one question this week you don't already know the answer to. Is that a deal? Fabulous. Okay, so moving on to the second lesson. Growth is about trade-offs, not simply just doing more. Keith's story really hit a nerve for me because it challenged the idea that progress is about adding more and more things. And I think this is where so many people often struggle. When you step into leadership, your instinct is often to work harder because you're learning, you're trying to be more efficient, to say yes more, to be even more available, and obviously to prove yourselves. So in order to do that, you add more meetings, you prepare more. there's more emotional labour to it, more responsibility that no one explicitly asked for. But the problem is adding more doesn't always create progress, does it? Sometimes it just makes you feel exhausted. And Keith's story reframed that beautifully, because discipline and growth often starts with a subtraction.
And I asked him, what can I do to really focus on all these things I'm trying to accomplish at the same time? And he said, take away something from yourself that no one else can take away to build this discipline muscle. And I said, I don't understand. Give me an example. He said, why don't you become a vegetarian? Do you like eating meat? I said, I love eating meat. I eat meat every single day. He said, take away that and for a week and just see if you can build this discipline muscle to take away something from yourself so that you can focus on the things you need to do in the way that you need to do it. And so I did that for a week. And I thought about eating meat 24 hours a day for those 7 days.
You wanted that steak.
I did. And I said, you know what? I want to try this for one more week, but I don't even want to think about eating meat.
Yeah.
And 9 years later, I was still a vegetarian. And I just built this muscle of being able to focus. And
what I love here isn't the vegetarian bit, although that's memorable. It's the principle. Focus isn't a personality trait. It's a choice. It's your decision. And leaders often carry an invisible extra load. Emotional labour, people pleasing. That's one I've heard over and over again recently. Over preparing and trying to prove themselves. So Keith's message lands hard for us. Progress often starts when you actually stop something. So your tiny move from this lesson is look at your workload and choose one thing this week to stop doing, even if it's just temporarily, even if you just want to test the waters and see, does the world fall apart if I stop doing this? Bet it doesn't. Really think about which activities are adding value and, frankly, which are just keeping you busy. I bet you'll find some. This focus, this clarity is your discipline in action. The third lesson that came through loud and clear for me was this: agency beats circumstance. Let me explain. So, we all know life isn't always fair. People don't always start from the same place. And, yep, sometimes challenges genuinely knock the wind out of you. Careers don't unfold on that level playing field we'd love, and opportunities aren't always evenly distributed. There will be moments where things just simply don't go your way through no fault of your own. But in Sonia's story, she reminded me of this. Even when circumstances are completely outside of your control, progress is still very much within your control. You always have some influence over how you respond. And her story captured that beautifully because her journey wasn't smooth and it definitely wasn't planned. And at times, it really was genuinely tough. But what stood out wasn't the obstacles. It was her dogged refusal to stay stuck inside them. Sonia's story is one that lingers, not because it's dramatic or attention-seeking, but because it reflects a kind of steady determination that doesn't always get recognised. There's a real strength in how she kept going.
So I moved to Doncaster then, where they had an FE college, but it had halls of residence. But when I found out when I was there, my local authority wouldn't pay my fees or my halls of residence fees, and I couldn't get a grant. What I ended up doing was just sleeping on the floor of somebody's room. So I didn't have any fees to pay for my accommodation.
For a year?
For a year.
There's no hero narrative here. She just needed to solve a problem.
Whilst you're immersed in that melee of things going on along, you don't actually feel that anything can change. You can't see a way out. You think this is your choice, and this is something that I learned over the years, that there's always another route.
Yeah.
There's always another way.
She was persistent in making sure she could take those steps forward. Now that's the reality of early leadership. You won't always see the path, and you won't always feel confident. And you know what? You won't always get the support. But agency means that doesn't matter. Agency doesn't need to have that certainty. Agency is about your choices and your progress. So consider, where are you waiting for permission instead of taking a step? Once you find that internal friction point, do it. Just take that first small step, then another and another, and you'll soon find the momentum that you need. It might not be as big as actually having the conversation. Your first step might be as little as writing it down, because once you've wrote it down, that's the starting point your brain needs to keep momentum going. Lesson 4. Relationships, honestly, are your real career accelerators. Every conversation pointed to this truth. And let's be clear, it's not just these 4 conversations, but it is repeated in every conversation we've had on this show. And I'm sure it'll be repeated again and again. Careers move through people and the relationships that you develop. Let's turn back to John now to remind you just how important they are, even if in that moment you don't realise.
After about 6 months, just a real sliding doors moment, got chatting to a guy in the lift in one of the offices who turned out to be the director of sales, okay? Didn't know he was the director of sales, got on really well. And he came to find me and said, look, I've got this project around hearts and minds in the organisation. You know, I work for Centrica, so the energy market was deregulating, so competition was coming, and he wanted someone to offer that passion and awareness around the business, and chose me to do it. Almost voices the people, go and talk about it and tell them why it's exciting and interesting. So I came off the phones, then the market opened up, then he asked me to set up a field sales organisation, then it went regional manager, and then it just all the time he was my sponsor and mentor of that. So again, as a lesson to find someone who will, and look, they don't open doors for you, Caroline, but they guide you toward those doors.
Oh, this for me, I will always remember this story. What I love about this story and the way John explains it is actually how ordinary it is. It was a chance conversation that could have so easily been ignored, but it was a connection that led to an incredible opportunity. He didn't have a strategy or a master plan. And then Zoe reinforced exactly the same lesson.
And it does create that relationship. So I think that's definitely served me well, regardless of what role I was in. And even in senior leadership, being okay with having more junior members of staff who knew more. And I will stand by that. I think just building that rapport and that relationship was really important.
Relationships are often talked about as a soft skill, but they're not. They're so not. They're hard and they're strong and they're a foundation. They are your career infrastructure if you use them wisely. So go out there and have a conversation this week with no agenda. Ask someone for a coffee in person or even virtually, just because you can. You never know what you might learn as a result of that conversation. And you know what? As I'm recording this at the moment, Bill, my husband, is having a coffee with someone who challenged him yesterday in the comments on a Facebook post that he did. Now, you know what? He could have quite easily ignored this or even just inwardly seethed a little bit about it. But he didn't. He picked up the phone, he made the call, and I know he'll come home thrilled that he did, and he'll have learned something valuable from that hour he spent. Maybe you will too. On to our final lesson. The final thread running through all of these conversations was one about identity. It wasn't about your job title or achievements, but more about the ongoing question of, who am I at work? Because stepping into leadership often brings an invisible pressure to adjust yourself, to be more confident, a little less emotional, more decisive, and more polished. And for many people, that can quietly turn into a performance, a sense that you need to mold yourself into a version of leadership that feels more acceptable. And John's reflection captured something really important here.
John Turner would not fit in certain places. That's absolutely fine. Go and find the person that is. But it's not the end. In 3 years' time, you may need that John Turner. So again, Caroline, just to close off, I work with my people on all levels on their brand, right? Yeah. So what is their identity, and then and just be comfortable with that and work with that, and just say that's me. You know, if I want to buy a Ferrari, I'll know it goes really fast, and if I want to buy a Volvo, it's really safe, and etc. You know, that they're okay with their different brands, and so should you be. That's what you are. We're not all the same. That is what you bring, and match that brand to the home where it works at that particular time. Authenticity, Caroline, is the number one.
And what he's really pointing to is this. Your career doesn't move forward when you become a different person. It moves forward when you better understand the person that you already are. Because authenticity isn't about oversharing or ignoring other people's expectations, but it is more about alignment. It's about knowing what matters to you, what energizes you. What kind of leader do you actually want to be? Not just what kind of leader do you think you should be? And Sonia's story reinforced that beautifully.
But you've got to bounce back, and that's one of the words that I use all the time is just bounceability.
Yeah.
And yeah, just keep bouncing.
Because identity isn't something you find once and keep forever. It's constantly evolving through your successes and your mistakes, through feedback, through experiences that stretch you and sometimes shake your confidence a little bit. And that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you're growing. So maybe the goal isn't to become impressive. Maybe it's to become more yourself with every role, every challenge and every move. So if you take nothing else from this little mini series, take this. No one had it figured out. Nobody avoided the doubt. Nobody moved forward without messy moments. But what did they have in common? They all had curiosity, agency, relationships, the ability to reflect, and, just as importantly, the courage to keep moving, no matter what was thrown their way. Thank you so much for lending me your ears today. And if this episode made you feel a little less alone in the messiness of early leadership, then stay with me, because what's coming next is about helping you trust yourself more, speak up sooner, and navigate pressure with a little less overthinking. And most of all, it's about encouraging you to make those small moves that will quietly shift your career forward. So don't miss what's next. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next conversation. And as always, make your move, even if it's tiny, especially if it's tiny.